Before we get to talking and asking questions, I just want to thank you so much for being willing to be open and share your experiences for the research study and be here today to share more of your experience and even how it was maybe to be interviewed for something like this. So before we get to that, we're going to introduce ourselves. I will probably just go first. So ever since I had my first extraordinary experience, I knew I had to share it with others and to guide others. My initiation started at 23 years old when I was lost at sea. I experienced a near-death experience, followed by a mystical experience, including channeling from divine realms, and ending in a spiritual emergency. Viewing the collective unconscious was both full of bliss and full of terror. Today, I am standing here to share the stories that are contained in this research that are similar but very different because each of us has their own story. I feel it's my obligation to humanity to fulfill this calling, and I must now tell you how this calling got manifested. Before my experiences, I was working in a locked county facility as a college student. I was just mental health tech, and I was trying to help my clients by listening to them and hearing their stories, but it was hard for me to relate when I couldn't see or hear what they were experiencing. So I asked for clarity. I asked to see and hear and experience what they were experiencing. And a couple years later, in 1996, I was given the opportunity, and I call it an opportunity because this is the theme of this conference, and it is an opportunity, but it took a long time to come here today and, talk about the transformation that occurred during the past 25 years. So now I'm going to pass the mic over to Oryx for 5 minutes. Oh, yes, you have your mic. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Denise. It's really good to be here with you. I'm Oryx. And in 1999, I went through my first experience, which I call vision quests. And one of the first places I called was the National Empowerment Center. And back in those days, they actually answered the phone. Lori Ahern, one of the co-directors, answered the phone and provided a lot of peer support to me over the phone, affirmed to me what I was going through, which I didn't feel like I was a sick person. I felt like this was a very important experience, what I was going through. So she affirmed that. She sent me a lot of really great materials, and that really helped me a lot. And now I'm the CEO of the National Empowerment Center. So also, I moonlight as a filmmaker. So if you're interested in watching a film that I co-produced with PJ Moynihan, it's called Healing Voices. It expands on a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today and gives you 3 real-world examples, including myself. It's now on Amazon Prime, but if you want to watch it as a group and have a chat afterwards, that's going to be after this presentation. So I'm really happy to be here, and I'll pass the mic to Claire.
Thank you, Oryx. I'm going to try to be concise, and Denise has told me that she will cut me off when I go over. I do subscribe to a trauma perspective on, in general, so I would like to speak a bit to my own traumas. I was born in Hong Kong to a refugee family that had fled Shanghai in 1949, just weeks before Mao's troops marched into the city. My oldest sister, then 10, says she often saw people being taken away to be shot. The family emigrated to Hong Kong, and my Hong Kong years were largely happy. But in 1955, when I was 3.5 years old, we were able to come to the United States thanks to the Aid Refugee Chinese Intellectuals Program, which my father was eligible for, having been a graduate student in the United States. In the early US years, I attended an inner city school in Youngstown, Ohio, where my father taught at Youngstown University. And I was a lonely, except for my middle sister, rather volatile and sometimes fearful child. And was something of an outcast because I was extremely cross-eyed, wore little glasses, and of course was Chinese. But when I was 8, my family moved to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and there I acquired a broad circle of friends outside of family, allowing me to grow up to become the mostly American girl my parents encouraged me to be. And as I grew into myself and my communities, I acquired a stronger sense of self and was rather happy. My fears, though not volatility, returned in my mid-teens when a family conflict, my parents' disapproval of the man who is my middle sister's husband of 51 years, caused me to withdraw from my friends and basically shut down because I couldn't really be critical of the conflict that was taking place in the family. I ceased to form or articulate opinions about just about everything because I didn't want to admit our dirty little family secret to my friends. I skipped my senior year in high school and attended Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina, where my father had gotten a 3-year post-retirement teaching position. He had been working at the Oak Ridge National Laboratories, and in those days, mandatory retirement age was 65. So he turned 65 in July of 1968 when I was 16. I graduated from college at age 20 and moved to Boston, accepting the second job I was offered as a secretary for 2 psychiatrists at Harvard Medical School at Boston City Hospital, which is in the heart of what was then and still now, less so now, but the slums of Roxbury. I was terribly bored and deeply depressed, and it was then that I began holding suicide in the back of my mind as an option for the desperate unhappiness that I had experienced for many years. I began hearing voices at age 31, a few months after my cousin from China, for whom I had partial responsibility, took her own life by swallowing 2 bottles of pills that she had brought with her from China. She was 2 years younger than I, had been sent to the countryside at age 14, and her formal education stopped. She had been separated from her boyfriend because he, like she, was a factory worker. And okay, 1 minute. Okay, so I began hearing voices. At Halloween night, I was forced to commit myself to a private psychiatric hospital in Connecticut, and was told that I would be able to have more privileges if I did that. I signed myself out against medical advice. After 10 days, knew I needed to be back in the hospital. Lost time during the waiting period of about 3 weeks. Was admitted to Yale New Haven Hospital at the beginning of December and discharged in mid-February. And I will tell you more as Denise asks questions.
Thank you so much, Claire and Oryx. So now we're going to go into the research a little bit, and at the end, we're going to have some questions from the research. This research is dedicated to all psychiatric survivors. You are not alone. Allow your voice to be heard. We need to hear your song, your lyrics, your truth. It is also dedicated to my dearest mentor, Dr. Paula J. Kaplan. Dr. Kaplan, yes? Yes, thank you. That's for you, Claire, and all of us. We just need to point the mic. Yes. To our, yeah. So it's also dedicated to my dearest mentor, Dr. Paula J. Kaplan. Paula was a fierce advocate and activist, a Harvard scholar, a research and clinical psychologist, author, and artist who died last summer, July 21, 2021, while she was why she was still fighting injustice as a true activist does. While she served on and resigned from 2 committees that wrote the current edition of the DSM, she saw the inside truth about how diagnoses are invented among a group of people ignoring or distorting high quality research. She believed that the DSM should be thrown out. Her website, Ending the Harm from Psychiatric Diagnoses, describes stories of harm, including her dedication to helping victims of psychiatric labeling file ethics complaints with the APA in 2012. And I was one of those, but I didn't come out then, but she inspired me to come out later. Her article, To Warn or Not to Warn, portrays the fact that psychiatric labels are unscientific and describes how dangerous it is to name any psychiatric label without quotation marks. She proposed putting a black box warning on each copy of the DSM because of the harm of pathologizing and labeling human distress. She's also a founder of Picture Social Justice and has documentaries that are shown around the world. So anyway, the research question for this research, the general research question is, what is the experience of individuals who experience extraordinary states and who have been diagnosed with a psychiatric label? I also hope to discover if there was any healing or transformation, but we didn't know what was going to come out. What are extraordinary experiences? They can be termed in different ways. Each person has their own term. So for this study, I struggled to find which term should I use. I didn't want to say non-ordinary states of consciousness because they're very ordinary. They occur to 85% of the population, and we just don't talk about it. So throughout history and throughout academics and researchers, these are the terms that have been used. So we can see here, we have bliss, we have cosmic consciousness, we have ecstasy, we have extraordinary experience, we have mystical experience, near death, non-ordinary, states of consciousness, numinous, peak experience. So I did struggle, and I just said they're extraordinary because it related, I guess, to mine and to the ones I interviewed. The purposes of the study were to share the experiences in the participants' own voice and to explore the meaning they found in these experiences, to examine the impact psychiatric diagnoses and labels had on individuals and to understand the harm done to people when they are diagnosed and labeled, to bring awareness to health professionals and the public about the variety of experiences and about the language used to describe people and their experiences, to learn about how to embrace human distress and suffering as part of life, growth, and health. And so here's where I said, this is the lit review that we're not going to go into, but if you would like the PowerPoint, I will give it to you because there is a lot of material here. But one thing I wanted to stress is about the eugenics movement that a lot of people do not know. The eugenics movement in the early 20th century meant eugenics means good genes. And in the early 20th century, Francis Galton and Charles Davenport were funded and developed a study, and they developed a movement. And during the 20th century, in the United States alone, over 60,000 people labeled mentally ill were sterilized to prevent their breeding. Ultimately, eugenics practitioners coercively sterilized thousands of people in the United States, banned marriages of thousands, powerfully segregated thousands in colonies, and persecuted countless people in ways just now being discovered. And this is from Lowry. Again, everything is online if you want to read. Then we go into Williams James. We go into how people are very nervous about seeking help because they are fearing that their experience will be diminished or even get diagnosed and labeled. And then we go into a lot of the stigma and risks and harm, plummeting self-confidence, loss of employment, child custody, security clearance, the right to make decisions about one's medical and legal affairs, skyrocketing rates of disability, and the list is endless. So the method I used was a qualitative approach. It's called IPA, interpretive phenomenological analysis. And this type of research focuses on the individual's experience. It does not focus on the general population. It's all about the participants. So they told me to pick 5, but I wanted to pick more. And so I picked 8, and then it was going to go to 9 or 12. Can we just put that on silent? Thank you. And so 2 of the participants volunteered to be here today. And so thank you for coming. We're going to go into some of the things you should be aware of before I start with the questions and themes. Please be aware that some of the participants online, some of the participants may be online listening. They may be in the audience. And so I ask you to listen with eyes beyond your visible reality. I ask that just for the next few minutes to really sink in and imagine what it would be like for you to look through their eyes. So the conditions to participate were they had to be at least 35 years old. Their first experience must have happened at least 10 years ago. And it was a non-drug induced experience. I asked for it to be over 10 years because there's a significant difference from the first time one has an experience, and then 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later, et cetera. It's constantly changing as we evolve. The themes that came out were these 6 themes, and we will go through each of these themes, and I will pause and read quotes from the participants. I feel it is essential to tell you about their experiences in their own words verbatim, so I will read the quotes verbatim. But the true transcripts, are included in the research that you can read online. So we just have time to go through a few quotes and then hear from our 2 participants. The first theme, trauma, stress, and illness. It can be viewed as an influential phase of the individuation process, distinguishing one's ego from the grander transpersonal self. That's by Edinger. So we have this quote. About a year and a half before that, I had a lot of personal stress. My mother had died. Then being laid off, and then thinking I was going to be laid off again. If I'm stressed out, I'm more prone to kind of go into one state or another. That's another thing that I've been able to manage more effectively over the last 10 to 15 years through meditation and learning more about psychic meditation classes and basically about managing energy. The next theme, ego death and connecting to oneness, the cosmos, and or God. Expressed itself through various experiences the participants described as an initiation into oneness within the world. It may be comprehended as the ego's response to a higher consciousness and transcendent quality of the self, according to Jung. While losing all sense of the ego can be frightening and even dangerous in many instances, this identification with oneness was often experienced as an encounter with a sacred realm. It was also described as living within an imaginal realm, which also contained myth, according to Corbin and Otto. And experiences like these have occurred since the beginning of time. And shamanic initiation is just one example of these experiences. So here we have a quote. I was thinking about how you differentiate between the different states of consciousness. I would say expanding state into merging with everything. I've called it being one with the one, loss of ego identity, and very visceral, real experience. There's no preparation for. It really piqued my curiosity because I had grown up with assumptions about who I was and what the world was. And it was just intriguing to find out that my former beliefs might not be an accurate representation of what actually is. And the second experience was terrifying but also fascinating and valuable because I knew that that experience was more real in a couple ways, more real in the sense that I was experiencing life without a presumed set of concepts, which led to presumptions about things. Those all had been pulled out from underneath me. The third theme, identification with the archetypal realm, may also be seen as dangerous and unrealistic, or a period of inflation as the ego dissolves. It may occur by identifying with the greater archetypal realm of the self, otherwise known as imago Dei, according to Edinger and Jung. And in these numinous experiences, encounters with the archetypal realms occur. In these states, the ego consciousness is possessed unconsciously, followed by an alchemical course of circolectio, in which the psychic equilibrium is restored. It's a hard word. Edinger, Jung, and Otto. An example, a quote, "I used to sleep with the nightlight on, and there was no door to shut there. So I couldn't just shut it and comfortably go to the bathroom. I started after a little while suddenly seeing visions of Jesus standing in front of the door to my basement with his arms outstretched, wearing a white robe. And he was a European version of Jesus, which I know was just given to me because it was the place I was in my cultural conditioning and upbringing. And it provided a great source of comfort for me. So I got to the point where I would see that vision on such a regular basis. I would wave to the bottom of the stairs and say, 'Hey, King Jesus, how's it going?' and give him a peace sign, or just say hi. And I would feel this overwhelming amount of peace." The fourth theme, pathologizing and labeling human distress and suffering, emerged when the participants were asked whether their label with a psychiatric diagnosis helped, harmed, and in which ways. And all 8 participants explained their experiences in their own words. It was absolutely horrible. I was referred to a psychiatrist who I thought might be interested. And he just very coldly said, "Well, I can give you something to make it go away," as if the hallucinations were caused by some schizophrenia. I really felt like a specimen in a strange way. I remember one day sitting in his office and he was just looking at me. I was really shocked and disappointed. And I said I didn't want to take any more drugs. At that time, I was taking 3 different medications and I was beginning to feel physically extremely weak. I had to eventually wean myself off the medications because I knew something was wrong. I felt like a specimen somehow. This next slide is, I think it's important to see the 8 participants and the diagnoses given to them and what they preferred. And I'm not going to read all this, but it's so important to me to look at the preferred description. And I'm just asking you in the audience, why can't we use the preferred description? Why can't we use their language? Why do we have to have the other side? It just doesn't make sense. The description describes what they're going through. The 5th theme, stigma and discrimination, differed in each participant's life. Some experienced extreme stigma, intermingled with discrimination, while others were accepted. Discrimination, well, I won't go into, everybody knows what discrimination and stigma is, so I'm going to just go to the next quote. "If I had had a single person in my family or in my medical community stand up for me, one person who would be on my side, because I literally have been told by my family, including my husband, look, we've got doctors who can verify you've got a file. You've got a file, Hope. You've got a file and you've got a label. Who's on your corner, Hope? Who believes that there are spiritual experiences? Who believes Lord, the great Hope, is having a spiritual experience?" And I'm like, I'm not the great Hope. I'm a human, and humanity is, I believe, in the midst of the dark night of the soul. And now humanity on earth is experiencing a global spiritual shift and awakening. And that's a perfect example of family stigma and discrimination. Here's another example. I remember another thing that sticks in my mind when I was being discharged from the hospital. They had a meeting with my family, and my dad was like, "I'm so glad your mother's not here to see this." I knew at that time that was kind of a typical dumb thing for him to say, but he was scared. I remember my sister saying to the doctor, "Well, how will we know if her or her chemistry?" And that just bothered me because later I have found that there's nobody who has figured this out. It's all theoretical. The last theme, compassion, humility, and meaning making, emerged from the data as the ego developing a significant relationship with the greater self. Edinger. Discovering meaning during the dark moments of life and accepting the suffering while also connecting to the larger self is significant in the process of initiation rites of death and renewal, otherwise known as rebirth and or reawakening. That's Campbell. I discovered my own personal myth, as Jung would call it. So in essence, it was like my own little red book where I would come back in and pull on the key learnings of Jewish mysticism. And I felt very invested in the mysticism. I felt I did have some serious breakthroughs. Some people I work with, they can't see it. And I call it cognitive dissonance. Unless they believe that it's possible for these things to happen, they are not going to see it. Whereas other people may be more mystically oriented and have a more open mind. And so these are some of the clinical findings and implications. The study found that it's very important for people to express their experience in their own words from their own perspectives. Integrating the experiences, at times rejecting medication or even psychological treatment, led to finding meaning. Importance for people to have family and community support, which gives people a sense of belonging and the opportunity to share personal stories while integrating their experiences. And having open-minded and culturally competent health providers can be key to normalizing experiences while also finding acceptance, compassion, and not being pathologized or mocked. And these are just some future recommendations. And since time doesn't permit, I'm going to go through them really fast. Firsthand stories, just like we're doing here this weekend at ISPS. Examining harm done by pathologizing. Transforming the perspectives and to apply trauma-informed attitudes to comprehend human distress. And helping clinicians overcome their own anxieties about trauma, regardless of the depth of darkness contained in it. Person-centered language, and changing the way society views human distress. And somebody told me yesterday, it changes one person at a time. It can change one person at a time. But it can also change with books or stories published. And so what I want you to think about is, what is mental health? Can it be the capacity to suffer? What is mental illness? Can it be the flight from suffering? Embracing distress, going through suffering. Why are we so opposed to that? And as I ask questions to the participants, you can think about that and you can look at the quote, but you don't have to read it. It's up to you. So I'm going to direct these questions to Oryx and Claire, and they will answer. These are some of the questions they have answered for the research study. So you can either use what you said then, if you remember, or just go off. But I will limit you, Claire. Yeah, I'll limit everybody. I'm a teacher too. So the first question, here we go. How would you describe the nature of this experience? Did it have meaning to you when you had it? Does it have meaning to you now? So maybe compare the then and now. Oryx, would you like to start? You just have to hold the microphone high, I've noticed.
Okay. Well, I briefly described it as a vision quest. And when I was going through it, it was my first year in grad school at UMass Amherst. And I just moved 3,000 miles from Oregon to Massachusetts. And I had a lot going on. Some of that stress that was the first theme had come up. But the experience itself was really powerful and amazing. I felt like I was having an epiphany. I was awakening. I was seeing connections that I hadn't seen before. I felt more alive than I had ever felt before. And in talking to people about that experience that I was going through and some of the things that I was saying, basically people around me felt similar, but they were scared. They were like, oh, okay, yes, what you're saying a lot of things that are true and I believe them, but your like personality is changing and that's scaring me. And so I guess the point I want to make about that, and I was having all kinds of different visions. The way I describe it is dreaming while awake. So the point I want to make is if I was in a different culture and I was going through that experience and I had an appropriate guide and people that knew about these experiences, and I like to call them vision quests, then it could have gone a lot differently. But unfortunately, I was in this Western society where people are afraid of these experiences. And what happened is that made it worse. It made it go bad. It wasn't necessarily good or bad, but it made it go in a direction that led me to hospital and diagnosis and that route, rather than if people had viewed me as saying, oh, this could be the most important experience you're going through in your life. There is a lot of validity to what you're going through. We've been through similar things and we can help guide you through this, and you're going to have great revelations from this experience. This is going to be maybe the most important experience of your life. Maybe you'll get your name. Maybe we'll name you through this experience. That's what happens in indigenous cultures through these vision quests. And guess what happens in those cultures? That it is a positive experience. So that's the main point I wanted to make, is that our culture impacts these experiences greatly.
Thank you. I had 3 different kinds of experiences, and I tend to go in 6-year cycles. 1983-84 was sort of a typical experience. My cousin had taken her own life. I had been passed over for promotion. I was deeply ashamed for not having been a better older cousin to Jean, as is described in my memoir. And it's similar, and basically my voices were talking about me. Who is she? What is she doing? My husband and I were new to New Haven. I was deeply paranoid. As I paid more attention, the voices turned mean. And at that point, my husband and the eldest sister and brother-in-law encouraged me to admit myself to a psychiatric hospital. I firmly believe that at that hospital, something attached itself to me, because whereas I had been paranoid prior to admission, after I was just signed out AMA, I felt that an entity had attached itself to me. I lost time for the first time in my life, and I would go into reveries for hours while my husband was at work, would awake and feel an itchy spot on my arm or upper thighs, and begin rub it, and it would raise welts. The second time, it was a spiritual experience. I felt that I was demonically possessed. I had conversations with a demon that wanted me to sell it my soul, and I refused. I was walking up Whitney Avenue in New Haven, to retrieve the car to get our son from daycare, and the demon was saying, "Sell me your soul," and I said no. I don't believe in God or the devil. They're just metaphors for good or evil. I can't sell you my soul. Plus, I'd read Faust and the Devil and Daniel Webster. And I thought there might just be a God, and I might, this might be a terrible mistake. So, of course, that couldn't be done. And then the third time, and I was able to bring myself out of that really spiritual existential crisis, and really sort of finding my way through navigating the choices that one makes in life, and good and evil. And I ultimately, what allowed me to regain my sense of self was when I almost took my own life by jumping from the 15th floor of the downtown office building where I worked. And then I remembered my 3.5-year-old innocent, beautiful son, who's now 36, and how terrible I had felt when my cousin took her own life. And I realized I could not allow my son to grow up with the knowledge that his mother was a suicide. I had to do everything I could to be the best mom I could possibly be. And that meant sucking it up, swallowing my pride, whatever it is, and doing what I needed to take responsibility for myself and my son. At that point, I started to get better. And then in 2006, 2007, because I had not sold my soul to the devil, there was, and I had not been bullied sufficiently into succumbing to the command voices that existed in the 89 to 92 timeframe. They began flattering me and telling me that I was going to help save the world and achieve world peace and save the environment. I said, oh, tell me more. And then I realized that I was not doing my job. And I thought, if I keep listening to the voices, I will, my husband will divorce me. I will become homeless. So again, I guided by my guardian allies, I was able to negotiate the terms of our relationship, similar to folks in the Hearing Voices Network have learned, is making appointments, pushing back. I did that the second time, and I know I'm over time.
You weren't over time. That was perfect. I will go to the next question. Do you think anything in your life, stress, life event, or anything else led up to this experience? And were you in any type of suffering or experiencing any trauma before you had these experiences?
Yes. Yeah. I definitely associate these experiences with extreme stress and trauma, and lack of sleep was a part of it. But I also think that I'm actually grateful for the experiences because I've been able to work through some serious trauma, including my parents divorcing when I was very young, having an abusive basketball coach when I was in high school. So yeah, I guess it's not necessary to go through these states to heal from trauma, but for me, it was a healing journey to be able to go through these states and work out some things that were just too difficult at the time for me to work out in consensus reality. I had to go somewhere else to kind of detach myself from the pain of it. So yeah, that's my experience.
Yes, stress has played a huge role in each of my extended departures from consensus reality. The first time, the suicide of my first cousin, being passed over motion at work, moving to New Haven, just wondering who on earth I was and what I was doing here, and what I was doing with my life. The second time, I had been working myself too hard. I had bored at a job at the Yale School of Management. I went to the Jewish Home for the Aged and worked way too hard, and needed to get my job done from 9 to 5, and it was really more than a 40-hour-a-week job. So one night, the night of the annual meeting, holiday party, I was racing up the highway to retrieve my son from daycare, to take him home, to drop him off with my husband, and then go back to the Jewish Home for the Aged to run the annual meeting, or be present, take pictures at the annual meeting. And I started having heart palpitations, and I almost fainted on the highway. And I thought, this will never do. So I started looking for another job, found a job working for the New Haven Downtown Council, which was created to market New Haven as a great place to do business. And I got the job. They had 100 applications, but they liked me and my resume, so they hired me. And it was at that point that I started having the, I started having physical manifestations along with voices. And in fact, the voice that said, "Sell me your soul," began when I was looked up from my computer, because, from writing an article for the newsletter, and thought, I would sell my soul to the devil for an easier life. And a few days later, a voice said, "Sell me your soul, Claire." I thought, go away. And then it was when I was walking up the street to get our car, where my husband worked, in order to retrieve our son from daycare, because you all know, those of you who are parents with kids in daycare know about, I needed to retrieve him by 5:30, but and then the third time, I'm not clear as to what was going on. My psychiatrist suggested that because I'd gone mad twice, experienced psychosis twice during marriage to my first husband, who is still a friend. I see him about once a year when our son is visiting the East Coast. I don't know what was going on, but I was married again the second time, in 2006, 2007, and something must have been going on. But the sort of the desire to, again, control me through whatever means, I can't go. There is more detail in my memoir, if you're interested. And but yes, and I have learned, I still have physical manifestations. The active voice hearing through my ears has stopped, but I still have intrusive thoughts. And interestingly, my voices decided around 1991. I'd gone back, I've taken Haldol, 83, 84, went back on Haldol in 89 or 90, and also took lithium. I have been medicated less than 2 years out of the past 39. But when I am under stress and my negative voices manifest themselves, I now take it to, I know that I'm not doing enough to take good care of myself. So I begin paying attention. So in that sense, my voices are my friends. And I also have true friends among and guides among my voices. And they recently encouraged me, rather than calling them guardian angels, to call them guardian allies, because they're not angels.
Okay, since I'm sensitive to the time, and I won't go on with the questions because there might be some questions in the audience and on the chat. So I want to start with the audience. Are you guys ready to ask your questions? Any questions? Yes. Let me bring you the mic.
So I'm curious as to whether or not either of you or Denise, you identify as an HSP, highly sensitive person. And if there's a movement actually also in psychology, and not being a psychologist, to look more at the at whether or not, there's a correlation between being an HSP and having these experiences, extraordinary experiences.
HSP, do you know what that is? Highly sensitive person?
Yes. I don't necessarily identify with that term, but I would say, yes, I'm very sensitive. Maybe I am an HSP. And I think a lot of us are just super, super sensitive. That's been a critique of people around me before. Oh, you're so sensitive. You're too sensitive, right? But I see that as a strength more than, especially as a man, you're not supposed to be sensitive. You're trained not to be sensitive.
But
So if you are sensitive, then yeah, you're gonna get some flack for being sensitive as a guy. Unfortunately, and I think it's still true in a lot of circles. But I would say now I'm proud. I'm proud to be sensitive. I do think it's a strength. And I do think it's a reason why I've struggled at times, because what does it mean to be sane in a sick society? Right? So if we're all not having some sort of existential crisis about everything that's going on in the world, then we're not paying, or we're just so closed off. We're so numb to stuff that we don't allow ourselves to feel.
Thank you. I do identify as a highly sensitive person, and also I identify as an empath. And an empath is someone who feels other people's emotions and energies, and I absolutely do. And I think that's, as a young child, I was very volatile, and I think it's because I didn't understand what was going on, and I would throw violent temper tantrums. There is a California-based psychiatrist, Dr. Judith Orloff, who has written a number of books. The one that was most helpful to me, absolutely revelatory, is The Empath's Survival Guide. Her last name is spelled Orloff, Judith Orloff. And everything she offers all sorts of webinars, but do look her up. I have learned that it is possible. I've used some of her techniques to ward off energies, because I can get really spaced out, really unfocused in meetings. And I've learned, she suggested just imagining an invisible shield over yourself. And one of the members of my Hearing Voices support group said that he learned to imagine a semi-permeable membrane where good energies are allowed to penetrate, and but bad energies are not. But he himself can emit positive energies. So I imagine that, and it really is. It's not that there's a shield. It's simply it's not a true shield, but it is our reclaiming our sense of personal agency. For me, throwing up my guard, but throwing up my guard means shutting myself down. And I'm practicing on that semi-permeable membrane.
Question in the audience. I saw one. Did I see a hand? No? Okay. I'm sensitive with the time, but there is a question online. Let's see. So this is a question for Claire. How were you able to date and remarry after these experiences?
Well, when I started dating I would never have divorced my first husband if my psychiatrist hadn't suggested it. He didn't want to get divorced. Because I had experienced 2 extended psychotic episodes, and the worst voices stopped tormenting me when I began considering it. I decided to go through with it. And as I said, we are still friendly. And the second time I told my second husband, and sadly I'm twice divorced. I told him within a few weeks of, a couple of dates, that I heard voices and, had experienced psychosis. He said, I don't think you're psychotic. No, but I've told other men that I've dated, and they say, you're not psychotic. So, and I never claimed I never accepted my diagnoses. I simply looked at them, and it was partial compliance that has saved my life and my mind. I was partially compliant. I took medication as needed, lowest possible dosages, really tight. And I was able to do it because I had to use an elixir of Haldol rather than the pills. So I could manage those dosages, 0.5 milligram of Haldol to ward off paranoia and voices, and then off and weaning over months and months.
Thank you, Claire. I think I'll ask one more question. Do we have one in the audience? Yes? Oh, hold on.
Leave it up like this. I don't see myself as somebody who's actually hearing voices. I more sense things, like that things are around me, as opposed to actually hearing them in my ears. But when I was younger, I think I was delusional, but at the same time, kind of like just a regular young person thinking I could save the world. And I didn't think of myself as unusual. And I'm wondering if that kind of stuff that I'm talking about, does that relate, or does it seem to correlate at all with what you had to go through and what your experience has been? Because I'm wondering if I'm kind of part of the group and not knowing it.
Oh yeah, yeah. We're gonna save the world together. I think that's the big disconnect with folks going through these experiences, that it's very noble to want to save the world, but it doesn't have to be you alone. We all need to do it. We all need to do it together. So that's a very common theme. It's definitely something that I went through. And I actually want to talk about this because I think it's a big part of staying within consensus reality, is breaking down that ego part. Like, I'm so different, I'm so special. No, we all have these. I believe we all have these spiritual gifts, and I see them as gifts. And so that has allowed me, when I have a mystical experience, and I have them all the time, I feel like I've been able to integrate my experience into who I am today. That I don't have to just go somewhere else in my mind to experience that. I can just accept that I'm a spiritual person and I'm deeply connected with everyone else. And my life has meaning and purpose, as does everyone else's. And I can share that. I don't have to go to some corner of my mind or believe that I'm somehow special to do that. So, yeah. Do you want to say anything?
And sorry, I was listening to you and I've lost the question. Could you repeat it? This spirituality, or
The question was, she doesn't hear voices vividly, but she senses.
yes,
And do you also sense and not only hear?
I do also sense, and yeah. And sometimes it can be frightening. And I am trying, particularly now as I've become more engaged in the work of support, the facilitating Hearing Voices Network support groups. I do best when I listen deeply, remember, feel, and then speak. And being that being that vulnerable, that open to feeling has been hugely challenging. And my life is much more difficult than it had been when I was walled up. It is a gift. It is a challenge to learn how to manage it in order to do good work. And yes, I also, when I was 21, I wanted to save the world, went to law school, hated it, decided that if I couldn't save the world in a grand way, I would save it. I would get a social work degree. I ended up with a master's in counseling so that I could save it soul by soul. And, Mo Armstrong, a Vietnam War vet and founder of Vet to Vet, who through PhD has a schizophrenia diagnosis, often says each one, reach one, teach one, but that grows exponentially as each one reaches another and teaches another.
Can you say that one more time?
Each
just louder?
one, reach one, teach one. That is a phrase that Mo Armstrong, a Vietnam War vet who has 2 masters, brilliant, founded Vet to Vet, coined.
Thank you. So I just want to be sensitive to the time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for listening.